Great.
And so, do you want to have a baby?
Do I want to have a baby?
Yeah,
Is that okay? So, just for the people watching, okay, do you want me to refer to you as Phil or Thunderfoot? What are you comfortable with?
either is cool.
Oh, okay, that's funny. He asked me what I wanted to start off with before going live, and I said, surprise me, and he certainly did surprise me with that question.
But
Um,
let me back up a bit and say why I chose that. Because I saw a tweet that you put out the other day saying that you didn't want to have kids.
uh-huh, uh-huh. Okay, so I did not mean to say that I don't ever want kids. I don't know what the future holds. What I can say for myself right now is I'm leaning toward not having children. There might be a point when I meet the man of my dreams where I am convinced that having a child is the right decision for me. Saying never at the age of 27 is pretty dumb in my opinion, so I'm not going to say that I'm never going to have kids. At some point, I might change my mind, but for the moment being, my number one priority is my career, and that's the number one thing that makes me happy. I can't imagine staying at home or taking a significant amount of time off work to raise a child right now. It would be terrible.
Yeah, I mean, because the reason that you gave in the Twitter was that there are too many people in the world, which, for me, it's a wonderfully rational way of doing it. But I mean, I sort of thought about the same thing
Yeah.
and come to more or less the same conclusion that you have, but for slightly different reasons. But the one thing that always comes back to haunt me is
Uh-huh.
you think of this unbroken lineage of 4 billion years, and every organism in this 4 billion year unbroken lineage managed to do one thing, to reproduce,
Exactly.
and then
Exactly.
it ends with a rational thought that
Yeah.
it's not rational for me to do this. There are plenty of people in the world,
Right.
and I think that my time would be better spent doing other stuff than raising kids.
Yeah, so let me jump in there and elaborate on that a little more. So the reason why I mentioned, the overpopulation issue is because oftentimes when you come across couples that are childless by choice, a big argument that parents will make is, well, they're making that decision because they're selfish. And I really, really dislike that argument because I really do believe that making the decision to have children is also selfish because it's your willingness or your desire to pass on your genes, to reproduce, and you don't think about the environmental impact of that. You don't think about, the certain amount of resources that get used by one person on a regular basis. And so I don't want judgment either way. If a couple decides, you know what, having a child is what we genuinely want and it's what we strive for, then I don't want to sit back and judge them. And I certainly don't want parents to sit back and judge childless couples for their decision. I just feel like, I have a very live and let live mentality when it comes to a lot of things, whether it's gay marriage, whether it's, childless by choice, anything that involves, or even drug use, anything that involves a
Mm.
person making a decision for their personal lives and it doesn't impact anyone else, I'm totally okay with it. You do you. So,
Yeah,
yeah,
live and let live. Great.
exactly.
I mean, look, we live in a time of plenty. What's the point of spending your time making other people's lives harder than they need to be?
Exactly. I mean, you and I come across a lot of those people on a regular basis, but it's okay. It's the nature
Yeah.
of our.
Which
Yeah.
which was going to be the next question I was going to ask you is that both you and I draw a lot of negative attention for, oh, well, a lot of positive attention, but a lot of negative attention as well. And I was going over the comments from the last video that I had, and when it's just me on there, there is never any comments about my looks. Well, actually, there are. When I go on camera, people always think that I look like I've just been defrosted from a glacier or something. But um,
Yeah.
but my sexuality is never actually a sort of go-to line to actually get at me. Do you get that a lot?
Yeah, I do. And, It's not something that I'm going to complain about right now, especially because I'm wearing a tank top during this Google Hangouts. Listen, guys, it's Saturday and I want to relax. I'm not doing a newscast. I'm just having casual conversation. But yeah, I think that that's one of the differences between men and women in media. Men don't necessarily have to deal with, the sexual objectification that women have to deal with. And I remember when I first started my career, it was something that I had a really difficult time with because, I was young, and I still am young. I started at TYT when I was 20, and I had so many obstacles in my way, and I still do, when it comes to getting taken seriously. So I had the fact that I was young, that I was a woman, that I'm, relatively attractive based on what people say online. And so you have to overcome those things to get taken seriously. And I'm still struggling with that today. When people see me, the first thing that they notice is the way I look. And the same goes for men, but for men it's a little different, because if you see a man wearing a sports coat, automatically I think people subconsciously think, oh, this is someone that should be taken seriously. If a woman is wearing a business suit, but she happens to be very attractive, the first thing that comes up is, oh, she's attractive. And then she kind of has to prove herself to get taken seriously. So I think that's like one of the biggest challenges that I've faced in media, and I'm working hard to get over that. But, of course, it is what it is. And when people do point to me being attractive or they think I'm attractive, I've learned to kind of take it as a compliment and just kind of like nod and move on and try to, shift focus onto something different.
Yeah, for me, for the large part, if people get really nasty about things like appearance, or even if it's sort of flattering, it doesn't even make it above the noise for me, unless they're actually got a comment about what I was saying.
Right.
It just drifts off into the noise. And so it's strange. People who think they're saying really nasty things about you are, ironically, the ones that I find the easiest to ignore.
Right.
The truth is the most painful thing of all,
Well, there's certainly a difference between people who just say outrageous things because they want attention, and then people who have real constructive criticism, which, by the way, I appreciate more than words can describe. The reason why I grow and improve, and I hope I do improve, is because I will come across those comments that have some sort of constructive feedback, and the best thing you can do is kind of take away from that and find ways to do better. And then you'll have the people who say crazy things, like I'll get comments on what I'm wearing, or, oh, I look fat that day or something. And yeah, you're totally right. Those are the kinds of things that kind of get, lost in the noise, and I don't pay attention to it at all. But there are days where it's tough, it's hard to be someone who's constantly on camera, who gets both her looks and her intellect questioned on a regular basis. But it's kind of like one of those things that you sign up for when you do this as a career. So you just have to deal with it. Every career has its downsides. So you just got to develop thick skin and move on.
But I often, I worry in part about how the next generation is going to deal with this, because they get thrust into this world arena of public scrutiny earlier and earlier. I mean, the social media, people are on it very young now. And something that you say when, I don't know, you're 12, 15, can get its way onto the world stage if it's done right or wrong, depending how you look at it. I think back to, you say that it's tough to actually have all this really harsh scrutiny, and I agree that there is almost a mental conditioning that you've got to go through such that it doesn't affect you as much anymore. Your skin gets thicker and thicker until eventually what used to be incredibly hurtful, you don't even notice. But,
exactly.
But I feel for these people who can be very young and get themselves injected to the point where they can be scrutinized by the whole world. And thinking ahead, I think this is something they're going to have to start teaching in schools, is the hazards, the dangers of social media, that anyone can see it online.
Well, that kind of goes back to the first question you asked me about whether or not I see myself having children. I worry about what the world is going to be like if I do
Mm,
decide to have a kid, and how will I protect him or her from, some of the heinous things that are said and done on social media. Right now we have this,
yeah.
epidemic in the United States of these teenagers who are committing suicide because of online bullying. And it's a
Mm,
really, really sad situation because I mean, how do you deal with that? How do you solve that problem? I mean, bullying has always
yeah.
existed, but social media has really amplified that problem. You know,
Yeah,
just to give
and
you,
people
go
from
ahead.
all over the world can now, if you like, join in that bullying. And
Hmm.
so, if you are very young, I can see how getting blindsided by seeing your name all over the internet, and there's nothing you can really do about it. All these people saying really nasty things about you. I can see how that could have a really devastating psychological impact.
Definitely. And recently we talked about these Harvard researchers that did the study on teenagers. And the study was based on behavioral reporting and also self-reporting on these teenagers. And they found out that teen girls don't even start developing empathy until they're about 13. And for boys,
Mm,
they actually experience a dip in their empathy between 13 and 15. And then around 16, they start experiencing more empathy. And I think that
mm,
that goes back to the whole bullying issue, because you see cases where some people are so vicious to one another, and you're
yeah.
wondering, and they're vicious to one another even after the person who's been bullied has committed suicide. And you wonder, how is this possible? But, it kind of goes back to how the human brain works, and, empathy is such an important thing. I remember when we did that story, I told Jank, I certainly lacked empathy when I was a teenager, and it's something that I'm experiencing more of today. And it's a good feeling to be able to put yourself in other people's shoes, because
Yeah.
seeing other perspectives, I think, is one of the most important elements of maturity. So I see how even people in the media treat one another, and it just disgusts me. I don't want to be part of that noise.
Yeah, and with it's one of those things. I remember what it was like to be at school, and in many ways, I am so glad that I didn't have this test of character of seeing how I would have behaved with this social media in that case. Actually, for me, it wouldn't have been too bad because I was mostly on the receiving end of it.
Uh-huh.
But so if you like, I wouldn't have had the burden of choice. But um, yeah, it's if you like, given an extra dimension to bullying of kids, and yeah, I'm all a very big proponent of free speech, and
Right.
the three general criteria which I have issued, the three limits is first one is when you're like inciting violence,
Hmm.
we should kill those who insult Islam, that sort of thing. That's off the table. Um, Targeting, arguably, the highest thing you can do is just target the idea. Someone has an idea, you say what's wrong with the idea.
Hmm.
Arguably, the person can also become an issue there, especially if they're politicians and, read my lips, no more tax hikes or whatever. If they've got a history of saying these things and lying, then that does become the person, and their credibility does become relevant. And
Right.
the third one is kids, because they are not really uh, they don't have the mental hardware to deal with it. And in a lot of these cases, they're trapped at school. They're trapped in an environment where they can't escape. It's
Yep.
more akin to workplace bullying. When you're an adult, in many cases, you can just walk away from it. But
Oh, yeah.
you can't do that as a kid.
Yeah, when I was in high school, I was definitely the victim of bullying. I've talked about this a few times on the show.
High five.
Right? A little
You and me
virtual high
both.
five there. It's funny though, because I will be the first one to admit that now I look back at it, and I found a few
Mm,
of the bullies on Facebook, and their
mm,
lives are just miserable, and I love it. It makes me feel great, and I feel bad admitting that, but come on. I went through hell in high school. There were these
yeah.
three girls who it literally got physical a few times, and I couldn't do anything about it, because if I had um, gotten myself too involved with them, and if I had fought
Mm,
back physically, I would get suspended, and I wouldn't be able to go to a good college. So I would just like
yeah.
literally let them do whatever they wanted, and I would go to the counselor and say, hey, look, they're doing A, B, and C, like I need some sort of protection because I'm actually worried about my safety at this point. And I think it really falls back to the administrators, because in my case, the administrators literally did nothing, and I didn't understand why. I was a good student, and those students were not, and it was very clear who the good guy was in this scenario. But it's just, I think that it's really up to educators and it's up to parents to sit their kids down and say, you are not to treat other people this way, and if you do, there will be serious consequences. If I ever caught my child bullying someone else, there would be very serious consequences. And I had a very strict upbringing, and I think that's what led me to be who I am today. So I would be just as strict.
I mean, for me, single instances and patterns of behavior, a single instance you slide. When it becomes a pattern of behavior, when it's systematic bullying, that's completely off the table. But when I was at school, just to share the experience, the school's response was basically boys will be boys, and they're going to have to deal with this in adult life, so he's just going to have to deal with it. That was it. And in some ways, I am actually grateful for it. It sounds a perverse thing to say, but there is an element of what doesn't destroy you makes you stronger. And it's, for me, certain that the guy who went on to university from there had the sort of seat of defiance that this is not going to happen again. It's not going to hold me back.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think there are a lot of apathy in schools about this. And that, if they do get involved, then it gets very messy. Who's telling the truth? Is it as bad as they say?
Yeah. If I were a principal or someone who gets to develop curriculum for high school students or even middle school students, I would definitely develop some sort of class to teach students how to navigate social media and how to prevent certain things from happening to them. One thing that I say over and over again on the show is that it's really important that people avoid sending naked pictures of themselves to their lovers or significant others. And I know that that's a difficult thing to do because you might have a really
social bonding.
Relationship.
It's social bonding, and it's a sign of trust. But the hard reality is most relationships, especially when you're a teenager, aren't going to go a long way, and many of them will end up in tears. And people, when they're emotionally hurt like that, will do all sorts of really nasty things. So, I agree completely that people need at least a heads up of where this is likely to go. Exactly.
I remember this one class I took. It was a journalism law class or media law class. The professor kept saying, anytime you take a naked picture of yourself, just remember that one day your parents will see it. And I think that that's a really good standard and a good example to set, because it's true. It will somehow end up online, especially in this day and age where oversharing runs rampant. And somehow, your parents are going to see it. And anytime I ever consider taking a salacious photo of myself, I think, how would I feel if my boss saw this? How would I feel if my parents saw this? If my brother saw this? I would be mortified. So I just avoid it at all costs. So for all you people watching out there, if a naked picture ever gets leaked of me, just know that it's not authentic, because a naked picture will never exist.
Having said that, what's she called? The Kardashian. There are many cases where for celebrities, these are the things that really make. The Kardashians are. I've never watched them. I know of them. That's my entire knowledge. And I know there's a sex tape, and the sex tape made them famous.
Yeah.
And there have been other cases like that, far less reputable amongst the YouTube community. And again, it really hasn't hurt them that much in terms of what people think of them, in that. I
would argue
for what it is. But,
right. I would argue that for the Kardashians, it certainly made them more famous, more successful financially, but in terms of, the public's perception of them, I mean, they're a joke. People judge them all the time. People put them down all the time, which is why, it would be incredibly easy for me to profit off my sexuality or off, my looks or whatever, but I don't want to do that out of principle, because here's the truth. Looks fade. Kardashians are beautiful. They attract a lot of attention because of their physical attributes, but there will come a day and age where they're not considered beautiful anymore, and then what do? And they might have a ton of money saved up because of the way they, exploited their looks, but at the same time, I mean, I want to have a career that I find fulfilling. So that's why I don't want to fall under that, category of, hey, I'm sexy, I'm going to pose for Maxim, I'm going to do everything with my tits out because that's going to be profitable for me.
I mean, it's certainly, you're right. If you're trying to project the image of or if you are going down the road of being the face of respectable news, then it becomes difficult. But what's she called? Megan
Kelly?
Yes, yeah. Didn't she do some like racy pictures or something?
She did. I actually didn't find her pictures to be that big of a deal. They were sexy, but she did one photo shoot that was kind of sexy. I don't see that as a big deal. I mean, I've taken pictures that I think are kind of sexy, and they're not, I mean, I'm not nude or anywhere near nude, but who cares? I mean, I don't find that a big deal. Sex tape is obviously the other end of the spectrum, and yeah.
This is one that I always, so there are a load of these things that I find really funny about mankind. Obvious things that they miss, like they live their whole life on a rock and they don't know which way it's spinning. And there are a whole list of these things. But one of them is just how blind people are to what makes these pictures interesting.
Right.
And what it really is the salacious pictures are basically, they're the sexy body language, but people wearing clothes.
Right.
So, but people don't see it that way. For some reason, there is this big distinction about whether you're wearing clothes or not. But what's actually what makes the pictures appealing? The reason that you get these pictures on the covers of all the magazines, and the reason they get people's attention, is because of the posture. It's the body language is conveying something that raises interest.
Yeah, definitely. I agree with you. I mean, I don't know what else to add to that, but it's really more about like the nature of the pictures. Which publication are you in? What were your intentions of taking those photos? I hate that the type of pictures that Megyn Kelly took, and just to be completely clear, Megyn Kelly and I differ on many political issues. But with that said, I think that it's unfortunate that if you do have pictures of yourself that are fully clothed, but you're sexy or whatever, that will lead to the people questioning your credibility and your legitimacy as a newscaster or reporter.
But okay, you're right, there is going to be a factor like that, but the lion's share of people who are going to judge you like that, you're never going to convince anyway. If their thinking's that shallow, then whether they agree with you or not on the politics is almost a point of pedantry.
Yeah, that's true. It's funny because I told you that I had taken pictures fairly recently that were I guess I don't know if you want to call them glamour shots. I just needed new headshots, and the photographer that I work with, his name is Isaac White. He's amazing. He wanted to be a little more experimental. I wanted to be a little more experimental. So the pictures were closer to glamour shots than I would normally do. And I had used one of the pictures on my Twitter account as like the background. And there was this one woman who was really upset about it. And she's like, do you want to be a model or do you want to be a journalist? And I was like, I don't know.
I can be both.
Can't I be both?
Yeah. Where is the thing that proclaims good-looking people from being journalists? In fact, I would argue that it's in American media, it's probably true that you almost have to be a good-looking woman to make it onto the news.
On television, at least.
I mean, Fox News is pretty women across the board, full makeup, whatever. I mean, it's.
Have you seen the women of RT? I don't know if you have RT in the UK.
Russia Today?
Right. The women are unbelievably beautiful. Like one is prettier than the other. But by the way, they're actually very smart, and they do good reporting. I don't want to get into. I know that the people watching this, I'm sure a few of them are like, oh, it's funded by the Kremlin and they're terrible. What? Just calm down. They do really good reporting on civil liberties violations. So I like that. But yeah, I mean, you're right. You're right. Especially in the United States. There is a lot of pressure to look a certain way if you're on television. I do some work with Meghan McCain, and she talks to me a lot about some of the pressure she faces because she's not a stick-thin woman. She's got some meat on her bones, and she's like, look, I don't want to develop an eating disorder just so I can be on TV. And I give her a lot of credit for that because I certainly feel that pressure, not from Cenk or from TYT, but you want to be able to go far in your career, and there's like this unspoken rule about how you have to be physically attractive because there's so much competition out there. There's so many beautiful women that want to do exactly what you want to do, and you have to compete with them.
Yeah. And it's one of those things that I've always been sort of fairly healthy throughout my entire life, and weight was never an issue come 35-ish, and then sort of 5 kilos weight gain, and you take a look at it, that's like 5 liters of water, and the body doesn't look that different. I don't know where it goes, but it's when you try and before that I never made any attempt to change my body weight, but it was actually really surprisingly difficult to have any effect on body weight whatsoever. And starving yourself is in many ways just it'll work eventually, but it's a bloody stupid way of doing it.
It really is. It slows down your metabolism. It really destroys your body, to be honest with you. You store more fat when you starve your body, so it's not the right way to go about things. But finding the time to work out every day and eat healthy. Eating healthy is difficult when you have a really busy schedule. So oftentimes people will go for a convenient option like fast food, but I try to avoid it.
And also, it's a bit of a personal question, but how much time do you spend getting ready for a show compared to, say, Cenk?
Oh.
So basically, if you like, there is this asymmetry as well that you have to go through other rituals as well.
Yeah. So obviously, I take more time because he doesn't have to worry about makeup. I have to put makeup on to be on camera. And understand, one of the reasons why, I started doing on-camera work at 20. Like, you don't really need makeup at 20. You don't need makeup at 27, But the lights from the cameras and everything literally wash you out. You just look completely white. So you have to have, like, makeup on so you don't look that way. Cenk wears foundation. But he doesn't wear anything else. Anyway, now I'm getting into details that no one cares about. But I will say that, of course, it takes me a longer time because I got to make sure my hair looks a certain way, my makeup looks a certain way. I put a lot of thought in what I wear. I try to avoid wearing something that's too sexy. I think about these things. Is this too sexy? Are people going to judge me if I wear this? So, and Cenk, he just wears a button-down shirt with a blazer and jeans.
And so here is a very interesting test that you can do on Monday. I'm going to do it on you here. Close your eyes for a second.
Okay.
Tell me what you're wearing.
What I'm wearing?
Yeah.
I am wearing a black leotard with jeans.
Enough detail. Right. Try that with the guys in the office on Monday. And even if they've worn the same thing for like years, you will just get that they will just turn white with fear, because with guys they just don't put that much thought into what they're wearing. Whereas with you, I mean, it took me a while to notice these things, but I don't think I've ever seen you wear the same thing twice.
That's really funny. I do wear the same thing twice. I have a lot of clothes, but
you check, whereas Cenk's got what, 5 sets of the same sports jacket. Yeah. Yep,
that's pretty much right. Yeah. All right. So unfortunately, I have to go soon, but I do want to touch on a topic before we end it. There is an interesting criticism that you face, and a criticism that I face that I think is something we should discuss. So you're often called a rape apologist. I'm often called a feminazi. So I definitely do want to touch on this before we end our Google Hangout. And let's start off with you. So what are the reasons why you've been called a rape apologist?
I think it's because the issue is very easy to morph from what you were actually saying to something that you didn't say, for which they can call you a rape apologist. Mm-hmm. And it happened very recently to a feminist on Slate. And if it happened to a feminist on Slate, then it's child's play to do it for me. And she had come out with an article very similar to a video that I made, which was just putting in risk assessment terms. And she said, binge drinking increases your probability, your risk of being raped. And if you don't binge drink as much, that'll reduce the probability. And this is sort of morphed. You ditch one word and you get from, she says that don't drink will reduce your chances of being raped, which is significantly different. And then you rephrase it in the rhetorical form that, are you really saying that women who drink deserve to be raped? And then the final step is just changing it to a statement of fact, which is she says that women who drink deserve to be raped. And so these are really, there's a series of really very minor changes, and all of a sudden you're accused of something that you never said. And once one person said it, it's very easy for others to repeat it. So.
Yeah. So I think that when you start getting into like risk assessment and talking about, you know, what you can do to avoid rape, you kind of start stepping into murky waters, because especially right now in the United States, there is a certain population of people that want to justify certain situations. And recently Fox News had an attorney on the program, and the attorney was making the argument that this 14-year-old, Daisy Coleman from Missouri, who got raped, almost deserved it because she was sneaking out of the house and she was drinking, and as a result of that, she got raped. I mean, what can she expect? That's what happens. And it kind of puts the onus on the victim, as, you know, as opposed to the person who actually committed the crime. And it kind of starts seeming as though people are making excuses for the rape that occurred. So I can understand, you know.
So, I mean, there is one thing, that everyone is always a general after the battle. But, you know, after the fact is different from steps you can take beforehand. If you're looking at ways to avoid, it doesn't matter what you're trying to avoid. There are actions that you can take that will either increase or decrease the chances of that happening. Sometimes they have costs associated with them. So obviously, if you stay at home all the time, you vastly reduce your chances of being raped. But who wants to? I don't want to spend my life sat at home. I want to get out. Right. So there's this interesting balance of factors that you've got to weigh up. And with rape, as with many things, there are almost certainly biological and cultural components to it. You know, you look at the prevalence of rape in different cultures; they're all different. So that says that it's not mostly determined by biology. But then you'd look at the people who are on the rough end of, you know, the serial killers and rapists, that sort of thing. These are almost entirely biological. You're not going to ever culturally, you know, it doesn't matter what the culture is. If they're raping and killing people, billboards are not going to help you.
Yeah, so, I think what I worry about is the people out there who want to carry out these crimes might listen to the advice that you're giving, or the advice that the Slate columnist is giving, and interpret that as, well, yeah, if the girl is going out and she's binge drinking, then that's what happens. She gets raped, you know. And I just don't want it to be misinterpreted as justifying, the end action. So I just worry about placing the blame on the victim, because
if I wanted to play it this way, the way that I would do it is, you can do the same thing from the other end. That if you have sex with a girl after binge drinking, this can mean that you spend God knows how many years in prison. end of your life, whatever. Yeah, if you get imprisoned whilst you're at college, that's pretty much your life. You know, your college education's gone. Your chance of getting on a decent career path have gone. So, you know, just if you're doing the risks benefits analysis here, you know, keep your hormones in check and everything will be fine. But the truth is that with a lot of these, especially when you're talking about college kids, I have very significant doubts about how impactful your chances of getting through to young kids on issues of sex are like, because there is so much drive there. You know, you just look how much success abstinence only had. You can't just sort of tell people to
not rape. Well, I'm trying to understand where you're coming from.
I understand the concern, but this is where I think you've got to take rape on this spectrum. That what we're talking about, the majority of college rapes here, do not fall into the category of the sort of psychopath, you know, sort of holding people down with a knife and raping them.
It usually has to do with over drinking, and one party taking advantage of the fact that the other party is incapacitated. And I think that there are blurred lines in some cases where, you know, a girl might be a little tipsy but she's aware of what's happening and they have sex, and maybe she might regret having, you know, that sexual activity later. But then there are very clear cases where a woman or a girl is incapacitated because of the amount of alcohol that she's had. And if a guy takes advantage of her in that situation, then there's no question that the victim there is the person who got raped, regardless of how much she drank. Just to give you a quick example, you know, I'm 27, I'm an adult, I know the difference between right or wrong, and I should know how much alcohol impacts me. But, you know, a few weeks ago, I went out to a party. I know I'm having a beer right now as we're having this conversation. A few weeks ago, I went to a party. I wanted to have a good time that night, and I had maybe 2 cocktails and a shot, two shots, 2 cocktails, and I could not function. And my friend literally had to take me home, maybe like 2 hours into the party, and I'm thankful that she did, because I had no idea what I was doing to myself. I thought I was having a good time. I thought I was in control. But sometimes the alcohol catches up to you in ways that you don't expect. And the idea that someone could have taken advantage of me in that scenario, and someone could have raped me. But the idea of someone then writing a column about that and saying, well, she really shouldn't have drank that much, because, you know, if you drink that much, then you increase your chances of getting raped. I mean, that would add so much insult to injury.
Right. So I think there is a distinct line here to draw between risk assessment beforehand and dealing with the consequences afterwards. And you're right that, you know, being the general after the battle is not actually particularly helpful. But I'm interested just to draw an opinion from you here that these majority of rapes that go on at college, do you think that they're mostly driven by guys wanting to have sex, or that they're mostly driven? The violent rapes are very clear that the guys who do that, they get off on violent sex. So this is one of the few studies that I've actually read on this, is that most men find violent sex a turn-off. It sort of reduces blood flow to the important bits, and so it's actually tough for most men to do it.
Wait, what kind of sex do they find? I'm sorry, I missed that last part.
Violent sex. Most men find violent sex a turn-off.
Turn-off, okay.
Right. And so, I mean, I don't know, but I've got a strong suspicion that most of these people who are doing these really unsavory things at college, they're not doing it for the same reason. It's not the crime of violence, I don't think, anymore. It's sexual assault, absolutely. But I think that the actual motivation is different for these two. Do you have thoughts on that?
Yeah, I don't purport to know what their intentions are, and I feel uncomfortable speculating on what their intentions are. But, and I totally understand, especially when you're at that age and you have your hormones raging and you really, really want to go through with it. I can understand, and I'm not justifying it. I'm being 100% clear that I'm not justifying. I can understand what the intentions are if you're not a violent rapist. But at the same time, we are adults, and we have the ability to control our instincts and control our actions. Taking advantage of anyone who is under the influence of any substance is not only immoral, but it's illegal. So
It's
regardless
sexual assault.
it's sexual assault, yeah. So I don't see any excuse for it, and there's no justification for it. And yes, I would like to be able to say, hey, girls, make sure you're careful when you go out, don't overdrink. But sometimes you might feel like you're in absolute control of what you're doing, and then before you know it, boom, you're unable to control yourself. And that's certainly what happened to me a few weeks ago. And again, I'm much older than someone who's in college currently. So, and testing those limits, I mean, that's part of growing up, kind of learning what your tolerance is. Sometimes you might think you might have a high tolerance for alcohol, and then before you know it, you have a few drinks and you're like, whoa, this is crazy. So, all right, and then, not to cut the conversation short, but I guess I should talk about the feminazi thing. So there'll be,
please.
So there'll be, equal explanation from both sides. So, yeah, do you want to ask me some questions about it?
So why do people think you're a feminazi? Or why do people accuse you of being a feminazi?
It's interesting. There were a few times on the show where I said that I would consider myself a feminist. I don't really know if that's the case now, because there's a lot of infighting within the feminist movement. And one thing that a lot of people don't realize is there were many different waves of feminism. So, of course, first wave feminism was about suffrage, giving women the ability to vote. Second wave feminism is where you saw, a more radical brand of feminism where, of course they fought for great things like reproductive rights, but there were some extreme feminists that were almost anti-men. And I hate that now those women are the ones that have come to define the entire movement. I think that it's kind of tainted the entire movement in a lot of ways. And they're very anti-femininity, which I don't agree with, because I love femininity and I love being a woman. And so now there's like this new wave of feminism that kind of tries to counter that while taking away the good parts of second wave feminism. So I believe in reproductive rights, but at the same time, I don't want to pretend as though I am biologically similar to a man. Men are physically stronger in most cases. Men have physical attributes that differ from women, and I'm not going to be stupid and say, no, we're 100% equal. I think mentally we are equal. Physically, we are not equal. And to say that men and women have the exact same desires and the exact same needs, I think is very naive. And as soon as you start off from that perspective, you immediately lose people. So when it comes to things like equal pay, of course I agree with the feminism movement. When it comes to reproductive rights, I agree with the feminism movement. However, men and women are prosecuted differently, especially in the United States. And if you genuinely believe in gender equality, then you would bring that up as well. Why is it that when it comes to custody battles, oftentimes the woman wins, even if she is unfit to be the parent? Why is it that when it comes to sexual assault cases among teachers, male teachers are prosecuted more harshly than female teachers are? These are questions that I ask on the show all the time. And so I think that, I mean, given my point of view, I'm relatively, not even relatively, I think that
sane is the word you're looking for. I'm a sane feminist.
Well, I consider myself reasonable. I consider myself reasonable because I understand the importance of males in my life and in society. I understand the differences between us, but there are some ways where men are treated unfairly, and there are other ways where women are treated unfairly. And I think that it's important that if you believe in gender equality, you have an open and honest conversation about that without lying to yourself and pretending as though, no, we're all 100% the same. So.
Yeah, I mean, so this is a nice little example to highlight sort of cultural and biological differences. It may be one of the most striking dimorphisms, if you take a look at society, is the prison population. You know, for every one woman in jail, there's 10 men, give or take. And you would be hard pushed to find someone who says that that's not mostly biological in nature. You know, that whilst we have different physiques, we also have different biochemistry to an extent. You know, different hormones. Right. This has an effect. You know, there is a dimorphism in behavior, not just in the physique. And then you can actually sort of shift that. Well, there are, I think it's, if you're black, you are 9 times more likely to be in jail as a white guy. And this is now almost entirely cultural. But,
yeah.
But yeah, so I think you're right that with the feminism, it really is poisoned by the batshit crazy element. And they're very loud. They say a lot of really stupid things. And you get this a lot with these sort of seen as more fringe elements is the ones who are louder and more vocal rise to the top. You to an extent get it with things like Greenpeace as well, that I'm a very pro-environmentally friendly in my stance, but Greenpeace just poisons the whole lot because they've done so many things that aren't justified on the science. You know, what they're advocating is actually harmful to the environment. And
yeah, I don't know enough about that to comment on it, but you know, I definitely do feel that. Go ahead.
For me, it was the poisoning of the well on nuclear power. They spent a lot of time making nuclear power the bad man, and it really isn't. Long story. Anyway, you were saying something.
No, I just, you know, I hope that clarified some stuff for people that are watching. I think at the end of the day, there are people that will constantly look to misinterpret what you're saying. And regardless of how many times I clarify my point of view, or you know, how many times you clarify your point of view, you know, people are going to look for a way to misinterpret and to argue and debate with what you're saying. Yeah. So, and that's totally fine. It's just kind of the nature of what we do, and it's good. But the final thing that I do want to add to this is, you know, conversations like the one we're having right now are important because it allows you to have an open-minded, honest, you know, discussion about different points of views and different perspectives, and I really appreciate you taking the time to do it. We might not agree on everything, but you know, it's good to have a civil debate or conversation about these different issues.
I agree completely that civilized conversation is, especially informed on the facts, is the way to go.
Right.
I always lament that it is so often overtaken by the attention seekers and the crazies. But anyway, I think we've overstayed our time by some 28 minutes. So, yeah. Kasparian, it's been absolutely wonderful talking to you. It really has.
Agreed.
And any great last words?
No, you guys should check out my vlog if you haven't already. It's youtube.com/AnnaKasparian. I'm going to film some vlogs right now and start editing them. So you should expect a vlog by Monday. I try to post something new every Monday, even though I've been really bad with that. And yeah, check me out on The Young Turks, youtube.com/TheYoungTurks.
And with that, I wish you all a happy Saturday.
All right. Bye.